Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Whalen. This is episode number 52 of the Sports Consiglieres Podcast. Along with me is my co-host, Jerry Calla. I think it's the first time we ever had two guests on the show before. So today, Jerry, how you doing today, bud?
Excellent, Jimmy. Very excited for this, for both of our guests. Very lucky.
So am I. So am I. So am I. So today we're joined with two most passionate, knowledgeable gentlemen who are preserving the legacy of one of the baseball's legendary and also kind of misunderstood players, Shoeless Joe Jackson. First up, we have Mike Nola, who is widely regarded as one of the foremost authoritarians of Shoeless Joe for the past 40 years. He's been dedicated himself to researching the life of Joe, and also has a virtual web Hall of Fame website. Is also affiliated with the Shoeless Joe Jackson Hall of Fame Museum and Library down in Greenville, South Carolina. And also we have Lester Erwin, who is a lifelong educator, also a established baseball coach down in Greenville, South Carolina. And he also knew Joe Jackson himself. His mother was married to Joe Jackson's mother. So it's our pleasure to introduce Mike Nola and Lester Erwin. Gentlemen, this is a real treat for us. Thank you for coming on to the show. So,
absolutely.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, Mike, I first contacted you. I just wanted to get a little bit of your background. At 40 years of researching, I know you said, off camera, your father saw Joe Jackson play in the 20s, and I was captivated by the story through 8 Men Out. Read the book, read a couple books on Shoeless Joe, and also I guess back on May 13th, a day that most baseball fans probably didn't really think that it would ever happen, that Rob Manfred lifted the ban, Pete Rose, and also Joe Jackson. But just talk a little bit about your relationship with Joe Jackson and how you kind of follow his life, and how'd you got involved with the museum and the library down in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah. Well, my dad saw Joe play. My dad was born in Waycross, Georgia in 1915. And when Joe was banned from baseball, he just came back to the South, and he would play for anybody here in the South that would pay for his services. And he played in Waycross from 1923 to 1925. And my dad actually got to see him. And that was the first big league ball player that my dad got to see. And so the memory kind of stuck out in his head. And plus he had a cool nickname. So I kind of got interested early in life. I got interested in it. I started out believing like my dad did. Most of the people in my dad's generation believed that Joe was guilty of sin just based on what newspaper articles they could get a hold of and read. But it didn't take me very long once I started doing some serious research to realize that Joe had probably more sinned on than he actually sinned. And that's kind of how I got interested in it. And then I met Lester in the early 90s, and the rest is history. I've been kind of in the clique after that.
Yeah. And Lester, I guess you're related by marriage to Joe Jackson, and actually had the good fortune to actually meet him and actually be in his house. So just talk a little bit about growing up in South Carolina and your relationship with Joe Jackson.
The claim to fame of me knowing him just shows how old I am. But no, Joe passed away about 3 weeks after I turned 5 years old in 1951. And my mother and Joe's wife Katie were first cousins, and my mother was named after Katie. And they were very close. They were close growing up, and they remained close until the day she died. We would go visit them regularly during the warm weather months. I don't ever remember going there in the wintertime, but I remember going in the warm weather months because it always turned out that my dad and Joe would sit in the front yard and talk, and Mother and Katie would sit in the living room and talk, and on a couch that was right there just in front of the front door as you walked in the front of the house. I spent most of my time going back and forth outside playing imaginary baseball, or inside in his, if you want to call it a trophy room. He didn't really have a lot of trophies there, but he had all his scrapbooks, and that's where he had Black Betsy always sitting in the corner right there at the door between the desk and the wall. And so we were there. I didn't know anything about anything except that he had played Major League Baseball. And that's really all I needed. I wanted to know at that point in time. I didn't learn anything about the scandal until I was a early teenager and just happened to, I guess, stumble across a box of newspaper clippings that my parents had at home and started looking through those. So I started asking questions and I asked my dad specifically, I said, did you ever talk to Joe or did Joe ever talk to you about the scandal? And he said, no. He said, he never offered to bring it up and I never asked. And at that time I thought, well, I might have done just the opposite. I may have asked.
Yeah.
Or no. But the older I got, the more I understood that. The respect he had for Joe superseded his inquisitive nature of wanting to know what might have happened. I'm like Mike. I'm a baseball guy. I played through college. I coached for, actually 30 seasons with high school baseball and American League. I have a son that's been coaching the high school ball for 25 years now. I've been involved in it all my life. So I believe in stats. And I also believe that you can't go out on a baseball field and turn it on and turn it off. You can turn it off, but if you want to hit this game, you can't do that. You may do it, but you can't make it happen. Right. I just don't believe Joe had any intentions of throwing the World Series if he batted .375 and did the things that he did in that World Series.
Yeah, I think just the history, he's got the third highest batting average, I guess, behind Roger Hornsby and somebody else. The other name escapes me, but anyway. But I'll pass it along to Jerry. I know Jerry's he's a baseball aficionado, and he was really looking forward to this episode. So Jerry, why don't you take it away?
Well, Lester, before you came on, Mike really built you up as a very good baseball coach. So he asked me to say that. So just kidding.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm proud to say that my son's putting me in the back seat right now because I was forced to win a state championship, but he's now won 2 in the last 6 years. So
good for him.
That's even better.
Let's just take a step back here. So we're talking about the much debated 1990 Chicago White Sox conspiracy to fix the World Series. So I think growing up, my dad is in his late 70s. I think that older generation, because all they had to go on was print when they were younger, I think they thought that Joe was guilty. Joe was heavily involved with the other players. And then I'm in my late 40s. And I think what really cast the perception out there is when Kevin Costner and Ray Liotta did Field of Dreams, I think in between all of the, Iowa, the connection that Kevin Costner, or the reconnection, if you will, with Kevin Costner, his character and the gentleman that was his dad in the movie. But all along the movie, I think Kevin Costner really tried, or the writers and producers tried working in how successful Joe was in the World Series. And that was the first time in my life, being a baseball historian, if you will, that somebody really cast doubt to his involvement. I think most people now are starting to doubt that. He came with Pete Rose the other day. They were reinstated. But my question to you guys to start off, I don't want to say this debate, but to really put your life work and, your life's passion to really bring, because let's call it what it is. Sometimes the perception trumps the reality. And the reality was based on his court testimony. I think there's a good fraction of the public that thinks that he is guilty as charged. So I was wondering if you guys, because the museum and all the websites that, since we connected with you guys, I mean, it's a fascinating topic. So what would you say, the first question I like to throw out there is, what would you say to anyone that says, hey, listen, he testified under oath that he took money. There's a story. I didn't see the transcripts. I know you guys have that. He wanted $20,000. He got paid $5,000. So what would your response be to that?
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, you first have to understand that, listen, the money is definitely a sticking point for me, and it always has been. I wish the money wasn't there. I wish he'd never said what he said in the grand jury proceedings. I wish Joe had got his own lawyer, and he actually tried to get his own lawyer. He was coached by Charles Kaminsky's lawyer, Alfred Austrian, for about an hour and 45 minutes. And he told Joe, you need a lawyer and you need one damn bad. And Joe tried to get up and go to the door. And this is transcripts. There's transcripts from Austrian didn't take many notes. And that was very rare for him, too, because he was pretty detail oriented whenever he deposed anybody. And he didn't take many, but he did take enough to say that Jackson tried to go to the door, and he blocked the door so that Joe couldn't go get his own lawyer, because they knew a Joe Jackson with his own lawyer, he's going to expose what Kaminsky knew when he knew it, and they would have run Charles Kaminsky out of Chicago on a rail. So they had to control Jackson, and they had to tell him, look, Joe, they're not going to believe that you weren't involved. You're going to have to say. You're going to have to say some things here that you may not like, but that's the only way you're going to get back into Major League Baseball. And Joe would have cut his right arm off to get back into Major League Baseball at that time. Not to mention, Joe had been drinking a little bit before he went before the grand jury, so I don't know if that had anything with some of the things he said. But now, he answered some questions that I can't explain away. I'm not even going to try. They don't look good on Joe Jackson. But when they get to the meat of the thing about page 11 or 12 of that transcript, and they asked him, did you run the bases to win? And he said, yes. Did you hit to win? Yes. Did you throw the ball to win? Yes. Everything they asked him related to his play on the field, he answered yes. And I got to believe that he was telling the truth. Another thing you need to understand is when Joe sued the White Sox for back pay in 1924, those transcripts had been missing for all that time, since 1920, right before the trial in 1921. And they showed up in the briefcase of the lawyer for Charles Kaminsky in 1924. And they had big X marks across the spots that lawyer was not supposed to visit. And one of them's up around page 11 or 12. They didn't want to say anything about him, trying to win. Another point is the foreman for that grand jury, his name was Bingham. They brought him to testify in 1924, and they asked him about Joe's testimony, and he said no one on that grand jury panel thought that was Joe confessing to anything. It sounded more like a story that a man heard on the streets, and he didn't ever believe that Joe had anything to do with it. It sounded like a scripted thing to them. So, I don't know what else I can add to it. Like I said, I own up to, I wish he'd have never done the grand jury, and I wish he'd have never took the $5,000. He didn't want the $5,000. He didn't know what to do with it. He tried to see Kaminsky to give it back to him after the series was over, and Kaminsky wouldn't see it because Kaminsky was too busy trying to cover up the fix. And then when Harry Grabner came to Savannah in 1921 to sign Joe for the coming season, he asked Harry what to do with it, and Harry said, look, you keep it. If those scum buckets used your name without your knowledge, you just keep the money and keep your mouth real quiet. They didn't want Joe to start talking because he would have exposed some stuff that Kaminsky wouldn't have ever been able to come back from.
Yeah.
Now, just a quick follow up on that, because Kaminsky, to a certain degree, is basically, some people feel that he looks like a rose, coming out smelling like a rose, because he hired the private, investigators, private detectives back then to kind of expose this. I don't personally, just my gut, I don't believe that. I mean, I think if his original story was he found out around game 2, or he got wind that something was going on in game 2, and then he's kind of glorified, if you will, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the annals of history, that he basically, once he realized he got the private detectives and he had the players followed. I don't believe that for 1 second. I'm in line with what you previously said, was that it was all about him just trying to separate himself from this thing. And, hence, obviously it worked out for him since they named the stadium after him.
Right. Well, now he actually knew about it the night of after the first game, because he went to the National Commission, which was the ruling body of Major League Baseball before they had a commissioner. And he told them that he thought some hanky-panky was going on with some of his players. And the National Commission basically, the fantasy at the line is it's a wealth of a beaten cur, because they were saying it's sour grapes. Your team got beat, take your beating and come back tomorrow. But now, did he have the power to stop that series? I believe he did, but I think all those guys were money hungry after the World War I shortened seasons. That's why they had 9 games. They were all about trying to make some of that money back, and so they weren't about to put this World Series on hold unless somebody held a gun to their head. So Kaminsky's definitely not Lily White for sure. He knew a lot of stuff, and matter of fact, I'm fairly certain he instructed Kid Gleason, the manager of the White Sox, to confront the players. We know he confronted the players before the start of the second game, and he basically said, "Hey, if I see any of you bums, tanking or suspicious, I'm going to pull you out." He didn't pull anybody out of the lineup. Now, Gleason, like Kaminsky, was a baseball man. He knew baseball inside and out. So he didn't see anything on the field. But, of course, baseball is such a game that if you and I go to the game and you believe the game's being tanked and I believe it's being played on the up and up, you're going to see that error by the shortstop is that shortstop tanking a play, and I'm going to say that's just baseball. So it's hard to say one way or the other. But now, when they interviewed Kaminsky for the trial in 1924, they asked him, did he believe Joe Jackson threw any games? Now, Kaminsky could have, it was an opinion question. He could have answered, he could have lied, he could have whatever. But he seems to have told the truth. He said, no, I don't think Joe ever let up one play the entire time he was with the White Sox, including the 1919 World Series. Now, he stood to lose a lot of money by answering that question that way. So we got to kind of feel like he's telling the truth. So even Kaminsky didn't think Joe had anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jimmy. Just to reinforce
for
the view, just to reinforce for the viewers, as Lester said, the stats don't lie. In the series, Joe Jackson batted
375.
0 errors.
0 errors. He accounted for 11 of the Sox 20 runs. He scored 5 and he batted in 6.
Okay.
Had the most hits in the series also.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Record
right.
To the 60s.
Yeah. Lester, you want to expound on that? Just did Joe Jackson say anything to your dad over the course about it? Did he talk about the scandal at all, about the playing career at that time, or?
No, as like I said a while ago, as far as I know, there was nothing ever discussed about the scandal, or they may have talked about his baseball career a little bit, but I would have thought if they'd have got into that at all, that the scandal would have come up. So I don't know if they even talked about that. My dad said they never talked about the scandal, and that's probably not something that Joe wanted to talk about. And so that's something that I wish we could go back and sit in that front yard again in those lawn chairs, and pick his brain. But that's something that will never be done, obviously.
Is there a lot of fallacies out there about Joe? Because, like I said, I read the book, 8 Men Out. I know he owned a liquor store. I think it was alluded to that, he was kind of deep in the bottle with the liquor store, but it didn't seem like that was true. And also, he was quite a businessman. Even though he was uneducated, went to school, he had to work at 6 and really didn't read, but, and started playing baseball at 13 and in the mill leagues. But he was a business person. He did have businesses in Georgia. He was a self-made man, even though he was illiterate. But what were some of the misconceptions that that's out there in the general public, and also what some of the movie talked about Joe Jackson, the misnomers?
Well, I think what you just touched on, most people think that just because he was illiterate that he was stupid and dumb. He was not. If you look at his life after baseball, now granted, Katie had a lot to do with that. She was a fiery, I'll be honest with you, when I was 4 and 5 years old and we would go visit her, sometimes it scared me because she had that look on her face like, don't cross me, boy. But she was probably as much of the business person in the family as Joe was, and probably more. She probably guided and directed him in that. And he was lucky to have her. Lucky stood by him through all this that went on in his baseball career, and stayed with him until the end. But yeah, he wasn't dumb by any stretch of the imagination. He did gain business sense, and he had a lot of friends around this area, especially that stood by him and believed in him. And that's not just something that people do if a dumb guy that made a stupid mistake.
Yeah, and then what about he still played though. He still played. I mean, even though he started playing in 1908, he still played after in I guess some of the I don't know what they call them, but the kind of lower level. But he still played the game. He still earned a living playing baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. He probably made more money after Major League Baseball because he was getting a guaranteed salary, plus he was getting some of the gate that he couldn't get with White Sox. So he was arguably the most successful of the other 7 men, no doubt about it. You know, a lot of people think that Joe was a downtrodden, depressed old man, and that was farthest thing from the truth. He just got on with life. All he wanted to do is play baseball, and whoever would pay him, he'd go play. I mean, he played from 1921, right after he was banned, till 1937. So he still could hit the ball. He got to the point where he'd hit home runs, and he'd walk around the bases.
Yeah.
They wrote about it in the newspapers, but
yeah. Well, I
he
mean,
didn't run anymore.
Just doing the research for the show, Mike, I know he had a couple interviews with Lester. It seemed like the bond between Katie and Joe, like I guess he left the Philadelphia Athletics like twice, and then Connie Mack had to go get him. So it just seemed like it was a special lady, and there was a special bond between in the marriage too.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like Lester alluded to just a second ago. I don't believe Katie would have stayed with him a second if she thought he had participated in that fix. Just from what research I've done, obviously I didn't know Katie, but just what little bit of research I've done on her, she didn't put up with a lot of foolishness. And I don't see Joe being able to talk her out of that. In fact, when he had a vaudeville show in 1914, and she thought he was spending a little bit too much time with the ladies that were part of that vaudeville show, and she sent the sheriff down from Greenville to get him, and she threatened a divorce, and he straightened up and flew right after that. There were no more problems with Mr. Jackson and the girls.
So Jerry, you ought to.
Yeah, I mean, guys, would you say, right, the following statement would be fair, right? So you have a situation, even though it's way back when, Major League Baseball doesn't want to really be embarrassed that somebody could get to their players, right, throw the World Series. They don't really want that out there, at that time. And that having Joe basically as guilty as the other 7 guys, so to speak, presenting Joe being guilty just like everybody else, makes the story better for Major League Baseball, unfortunately for Joe,
right,
as opposed to without Joe. Do you think that that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Lester.
I think it's fair. I think because Major League Baseball is going to cover their tails. They certainly don't want to do anything that's going to give any type of signal or sign that they were in the wrong, or the White Sox were in the wrong, or Kaminsky was in the wrong. They want to make sure that everything's hunky-dory with them, and put all the blame on the Sox. And so they just about had to include all of them to make that happen, and that's what they did.
If I might add, I've never subscribed to the St. Joe theory. A lot of people, they're living in la-la land. They think Joe didn't have any knowledge of it or whatever. I've never had that St. Joe theory in my mind. I believe Joe knew something was going on, and the reason I say that is in the 1980s, I interviewed 2 gentlemen that were kids on the street in Chicago at the time of the World Series, and they both told me that they had heard the rumors of the fix as kids, just walking around the street and heard the stuff. So it was the worst kept secret in all secret keeping history. So there's a lot of different levels of guilt in this thing. And I believe that Joe should have been banned for a certain amount of time just for the guilty knowledge and taking the $5,000. But to be banned like he was, I think it was a little bit. I think Landis should have held his own investigation and investigated each one of those men and their participation, because and during the 1920 trial, they interviewed or put Sleepy Bill Burns, who was one of the gamblers, on the stand, and they asked him about the first morning in Cincinnati, and he said that he saw Joe Jackson in the lobby of the hotel, and he walked up to him and was trying to make sure the fix was still in, and he said it didn't take him very long to realize that Joe had no clue what he was talking about, and so he moved on to find Seacott or Gandil to find out what was actually going on. So I don't think Joe knew any details, but I think he knew some of his guys were, in on the fix or talking about doing it. And a lot of people always ask me, why didn't Joe go and tell what he knew? And my response to that is, who does he tell? And what does he say? Because at that point, it becomes his word against Gandil's word, and Gandil's not going to go, yeah, boss, you got me. I was throwing the series. It's not. And they're going to laugh Joe Jackson. And Joe, the uneducated bumpkin from South Carolina, they're going to kick him out of baseball for even bringing it up, because they're like, that's asinine. There's no way a whole team is going to throw the World Series. It's never been done before. When that game fixing had been done before, Hal Chase, big time, but not a whole team or a great majority.
And I guess Landis wasn't really a baseball guy, so he wanted to kind of drop the hammer on it too. So he really wasn't affiliated with baseball. He was, he was a lawyer. But I think that was. You have any background on Landis? Like, it was unequal justice, or I think he just figured out, root the problem out and then move forward.
Well, yeah. He was. I'm gonna lump them all in the same basket and float them down the river, because Landis, when he was on the federal bench, he was very, very detailed about getting to the bottom of a story. But he didn't do that with the Black Sox. He just lumped them all in that basket and sent them down the river. Washed his hands of it. Goodbye.
And just looking back, getting cleared. I know there's kind of some misnomers about being banned and being alive and everything else. When do you thought it was like the closest that Manfred would ever? Because it seemed like Joe Jackson and Pete Rose are always lumped together. It's always they're always lumped together. And one, were you surprised that it came down? And two, like, when do you think it was the closest for you guys to feel like that his name would have been cleared? And it doesn't mean that he's going to be able to get into the Hall of Fame too. That's a whole other story.
It was whenever I read the article the first time, it was a total shock to me. I had no indication at all that this was even being considered, much less that it was going to happen. So yeah, it was a shock to begin with, and then when that kind of wore off, obviously it was exciting, because now he is eligible to go in the Hall of Fame if they vote him in. The time that in our dealings with this the last 40 years, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know about Mike, but the time that I felt we were the closest to possibly getting something done was whenever Ted Williams joined forces with us. Not actually joined forces with us, but he actually came out and took Joe's side and told Major League Baseball that he served his sentence. He deserves to be cleared and have a chance to go in the Hall of Fame, because he was obviously one of the greatest hitters that ever played the game. And my feelings about that was that whether you like Ted Williams or not, when Ted Williams spoke, baseball was going to listen, because he was that type of person and that type of player, former player. But of course, whenever he passed away, that kind of dropped us back to where we were before, because I figured if it hadn't been done by the time he passed away, that it wasn't going to be done. And I really felt like then that it may not ever be done. So we went that many years just kind of out there in the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden this is just drops in our laps, and it's really been a total surprise.
Did you have any warning that was going to happen? I mean, and also, did you talk to like the Pete Rose? Like, I know he was working through his lawyer. Did you ever talk to like Pete Rose's people on this, and kind of like, or is it kind of two separate things? You had your camp, he had his camp.
It was kind of like two separate things. I thought I had an opportunity to talk to Pete Rose at one time, my sister and her family lived in Florida, and we were there visiting, and they said Pete Rose does a radio show from some restaurant 2 or 3 nights a week or whatever. And they said, do you want to go over there and see if you can see him? And I said, well, sure, I'd love to. And if I'd gotten to see him, I was trying to talk to him about the situation. But it just so happened that he was out of town and somebody else was doing the show that night. So no, all of my efforts have been about Joe. There's been no communication or no connection with the Pete Rose situation at all.
Oh.
Now, what do you guys think is going to happen the first time he's on that Hall of Fame ballot?
Who knows? I mean, in my perfect dream, he gets 16 votes and he gets put in, or at least he gets 12 to get that. But who knows? Who knows if we're going to fight hard between now and the time that this committee meets in the winter of 2027 to try to get him on a ballot, and then whatever happens. For Lester and I, this would be icing on the cake. We set out to have his name cleared. We did that. Joe's way more famous outside the Hall of Fame than he ever will be inside the Hall of Fame. But I mean, it would be icing on the cake, and we're obviously going to push for that now that we've got his name cleared, because we believe he deserves to be there. The Hall of Fame is sadly lacking without a Pete Rose and a Joe Jackson there, and we're going to push hard for Joe.
Would you agree with this, that them on the ballot together helps each other's cases out? In the sense that, hey, listen, these are two guys that have been banned probably for way, way longer than they should have. Now they're on together. Let's kind of make that wrong a right and get them in together. Would you agree with that, or you don't think?
I would like to believe that the human spirit is that way. I don't know. I don't know all these members well enough to know, how they feel about Joe's supposed crime and Pete's supposed crime. So I'm sure I'm sure Pete's going to go on the first ballot, because I believe the climate is right. I believe Major League Baseball and is ripe to correct this injustice now. I don't know what they'll do with Joe, but I know that all I can tell you is we're going to push hard to get him on that ballot. And if he's on there with Pete, then I guess the chips will fall where they may. But I'm just not sure. I don't know if I can answer that question, because, again, I don't know everybody on that committee and how they may feel about, these supposed crimes. They may be ready to punish Joe again. I don't know.
I think it would be easier for Major League Baseball if they put both of them in at the same time, because I think if they took one and didn't take the other, they're going to get some backlash.
I agree with that. Yes,
true. To make it go away, basically.
It doesn't matter which camp it is; they're going to get some backlash, and I think they're showing now that they're trying to get as far away from that type of thing as possible.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I'm sorry, Jimmy, go ahead, something Mike said. He talked about the climate for Rose being pretty good now. Well, which is why I think a lot of people think he'll get in the Hall of Fame. With that being said, since Rose has been reinstated, Cincinnati has come out and basically, I would say, for a lack of a better term, just given a push. They're talking about honoring him, I believe, sometime over the summer again, right? Are the White Sox going to do that?
I haven't heard anything from the White Sox.
Right.
It's like crickets.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, you might have to petition the Pope, but he's a White Sox fan, so you might as well say ask for clemency or something like that. So
somebody said that the other day. It took a Chicago Pope to get Joe cleared. And we don't care who it took. We're just glad it happened.
But just what's your two gentlemen's relationship, Mike? I mean, Lester. Mike didn't want to. He wanted to share the spotlight. Just to let you know, he said there were other people involved with this mission to kind of get Shoeless Joe into his name cleared and in the Hall of Fame. So he definitely, reached out to a couple people, and thankfully you came on. So it wasn't really a solo effort. So collaboratively, who else would you like to recognize, and what's your relationship? Did you guys know each other growing up, or like how did you kind of come to be? And you're also on the advisory board, I guess, of the Joe Jackson Museum and Library down in Greenville, South Carolina.
No,
Well,
Mike and I just met through the Joe Jackson process 30, 40 years ago. We just happened to meet in the middle of this situation, and that's the earliest that we knew each other. There have been a lot of other people involved in this process, and sadly to say, a lot of them are not with us anymore. And but they were as much of a staunch supporter of Joe and wanting to see this done as we've ever been. And I know Mike's a young guy, and I'm not a young guy, but I'm just thank God I'm still alive to be able to see where we are today, and hope people will let me hang around long enough to see the next step come to be. Yeah, it's been a great run. It's been a great process, and we've met some great people along the way that have helped us. People we've reached out to, politicians that have helped us, and different people of that nature. And it's been a blessing to go through this, and it's been a labor of love. And obviously, more for Mike, it's been a research type thing, and a love for Joe. Mine is a little bit based more on a personal basis, because I happen to know Joe whenever I was young, and his family. But it's all the same thing. We're all shooting for the same star.
Anybody you want to recognize, though? You said politician. Anybody kind of help you or shepherd you through the process? Because Lester, I think you petitioned Congress, right? You went to Washington even to petition to clear his name.
We went to Washington, and that was quite an experience, because the guy that took us said he had everything lined up, and basically the only thing he had lined up was airline reservations. And he said he had 12 or 15 senators we could go meet at appointments with. He had none. We walked the halls of the Senate for 2 days with Black Betsy in hand, and popped into any office that was open and talked to whoever we could. And every one of those, I can't remember all of them. Strom Thurmond was one, but from South Carolina. But everyone that we talked to was totally in favor of what we were doing, and said that they would try to help. And yet, when the push came to shove down at the end, they didn't do anything. We got more help from some of the local politicians. There's a guy that I know right here and around the Greenville area, Jim Mattis. He was in the House of Representatives here in South Carolina, and he did get a resolution passed asking Major League Baseball to clear Joe's name. Mike can probably remember this guy's name, John Passalugia or something like that, from Louisiana, that did the same thing in Louisiana.
Right.
So those guys did step up and help us, and obviously it didn't do a whole lot of good, but it was another step in the process.
Is our ex-commander-in-the-chief on record for saying anything, being a big White Sox fan, President Obama?
Not that I'm
not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Right.
And then just with Black Betsy, did that one of the bats get auctioned off, or Lester? You still have one of the bats that Black Betsy?
We auctioned it back in 2001.
Okay. And then just with the museum, how did that come to be? I guess it's as original the house is in Greenville, South Carolina. You kind of moved it around. It does offer like services like a library. It's a living museum. But just talk a little bit about the museum, how it came to be, and then and what does it offer to visitors?
Well, it's really.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say. There was an assistant to the mayor, Arlene Markley, that got interested in Joe in the the mid 90s. And she started pushing to try to get the city of Greenville or somebody to buy the house and turn it into a museum. And that's how the museum came into being, is just from her, with her city contacts, could get things done. And and some contacts got to Richard Davis, who was with Trademark Property. He owns Trademark Properties out of Charleston, and he has a show, or had a show, on one of those home improvement networks where they flipped houses and stuff. And so he took it upon himself to buy the house and move it outside the minor league ballpark there in Greenville, and renovate it and flip it basically for one of his episodes on the show. And then he deeded the museum to the foundation, the Shoeless Joe Jackson Foundation. So that's how the museum came about. So yeah, that was in 2006.
No, guys, it's a, you know, again, you talk about the timing for us. It's an honor to have you both on. The timing of everything. You know, you had the big announcement. Not that long ago, we had a gentleman, Keith O'Brien. He wrote a book about Pete Rose. You know, his take on it was he came on with us. His book wasn't, pro or against. It was just, here are the facts. You know, here are a lot of things that people don't know. Here are a lot of the meetings. This is what Pete was told. And again, you know, we're having you on. You know, I think listen, my mind has changed a little bit. I mean, I started researching this thing when we agreed to have you on, and you guys were gracious enough to come on. And I just think that the problem is now is that, hopefully, I don't want to say, because I mean, Mike said it best. He wasn't, into the St. Joe camp, but, hopefully, he gets elected to the Hall of Fame. And really, what a honor and what a story that would be for you guys, making this your life's passion, and to see the dream really become a reality. I mean, that would be, fantastic for you guys, and it would be fantastic for Major League Baseball. Because again, I think anybody that really reads into this, I don't want to say they wrapped him up, because again, his hands are not completely clean of this, but I just think, going back and, the perception of him, what was he really a big drinker, or was it easy to say that because he had a few drinks and then wound up owning a liquor store, and it was just easy to go with that narrative? I don't know. There's a lot of things, when you do the research, that just seem a little too convenient, during the trial, before the trial, and after the trial. So, again, we thank you guys for coming on, and, it would be an honor if we could stay in touch, because I'm sure you said 2027. I mean, that'll be here before you know it. And I'm sure you guys are going to do, a boatload of work between now and then to really see this thing through. I mean, it's an amazing story. And I think this is what I always say this, and Jimmy and I always say this, not to get geeky here, but, when they say, it was in the Moneyball, who says baseball, isn't romantic. And I don't know if other sports, really would generate this deep-rooted passion, for a cause like this, because, it's baseball. I mean, I think baseball does that, the both of you, you have, you guys met, right, doing something like this, in a unique situation. You have one gentleman who has, family attachments, to the Jacksons, and, it's a great story. And I really commend you both, for staying on point. And, like I said, I mean, it would be a wonderful thing for Major League Baseball. And I think, to add what Lester said, I think it would be tremendous, for younger, older generations to see both of them get in, Pete Rose and Joe Jackson get in together.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to make 2 points real quick.
Yeah.
One, Lester and my dream absolutely came true last Tuesday. The Hall of Fame, again, is just icing on the cake. We accomplished the goal we set out many years ago to do, and that's to get his name cleared. And I forgot to. So go.
Yeah,
Oh, I know what it was. I met a lot of very nice people, Lester included, all because of a dead ball player that I never knew. And so even if Joe had never been cleared, the journey was worth it for me personally, because I met a lot of nice people that I never would have got to meet had it not have been for Joe Jackson. So I'll leave it at that.
That's a definite. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Well,
not that I'm a nice guy, but that we met a lot of nice people.
You are a nice guy.
Hold on.
Hey.
Lester, to be fair, at the beginning, before you came on, he never said you were a nice guy. He said you were a great baseball coach. So
Let me tell you. Let me tell you how nice a guy Lester was. When I first met Lester, he invited me to his apartment. He didn't know me. He didn't know if I was coming to rob him or whatever. He welcomed me in his house, and then all of a sudden he started bringing out all this Joe Jackson stuff that he had. And then he brings out Black Betsy and lets me hold it, and I thought I died and gone to heaven at that point. But that's the kind of guy Lester Erwin is. He just took me in like, he'd known me all his life. So he is a good guy, very good guy.
Yeah. Well, just to echo Jerry's sentiment, but thank you for coming on. This has been great. Like I said, 88. Like I was really, like I said, I read plenty of books on Joe Jackson with the 8 Men Out and biographies and everything else. But if they do get in, that's going to be the toughest ticket in Cooperstown. I mean, there probably is not going to be a hotel room 20 miles from Cooperstown, but. I usually pass along to Jerry, but I just wanted to, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on. This has been a real treat for us, especially, the debate's always good. And then on should he be in and everything else. So, I mean, the debate's good. But I just want to just give our shout out to our producer, Dave Sturchill, Chop Sports Media, for producing this episode. But thank you, Mike, and thank you, Lester, for coming on. It really is a special treat. I'll pass it to Jerry, and then I guess you guys can just have your parting words on that. So, Jerry, why don't you?
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Lester. You want to take a part? Yeah. Leave us with something?
Well, I certainly appreciate Mike hooking me up with you guys and having me on. It's always fun to talk about Joe. I'm not near as deep into the research of this whole situation as Mike is, but my passion for the whole thing is as great as Mike's is, and I think that's what's helped us along is that our passion has been so strong and our belief has been so strong that I'm like Mike and like you guys. I don't think his hands are totally clean, but I go back as a baseball coach and a baseball player all my life. I believe in stats, and you can't fix the stats. And what he did on the back.
Phone was died, but all right. Well, go ahead, Mike. We'll leave you with this.
I appreciate you guys having us on. We worked long hours and many years, and it came true. And I appreciate you guys having us on. And feel free to reach out to us in the future, and we'll be glad to do it again.
I think we definitely will. And you run the virtual website for Joe, and also it's blackbetsy.com, which had everything, has a lot of research on there, a lot of book, a lot of. We weren't talking bad about you, Lester. So
I apologize.
Yeah, that's all right. But at the third person, you figure the most hits it's behind Roger Hornsby and Ty Cobb. I forgot about Ty Cobb. So that's who Joe Jackson behind. So on the field, he was unmatched and really great. But Mike, why don't you take us out with just what you do, and then on just to kind of keep the persona of Joe Jackson alive.
Well, I started the Shoeless Joe Jackson Virtual Hall of Fame in 1996. It's at blackbetsy.com, and just trying to get the word out. That was the only way I knew back in the day to try to get the word out to the masses is when the internet became when the World Wide Web became a thing, and that's what I did for a living. It was just a natural transition for me to put up a website and try to give out all the information, all of my research and research that other people had done. So come see us at blackbetsy.com.
Well, listen, guys, again, thanks for coming on. We are honored to have you on. We will like Jimmy said, most definitely stay in touch with you guys, over these next couple of months, next couple of years as well. Jimmy, don't worry about forgetting Ty Cobb. Remember, Joe Jackson didn't invite Ty Cobb to play in Ray Kinsella's backyard and Field of Dreams. So that's okay.
All right. Yeah.
But anyway, we're going to close up this show. We just want to say we're going to leave our viewers with this. Again, follow the Joe Jackson Museum. We're going to have all that information posted on our social media accounts, the online museum, if you will, and all the Joe Jackson tributes. But I will leave you with this. When these gentlemen came on, one of the first things Lester said was about the stats. And I think you should leave this program, if you will, or after listening to this program, look at Joe Jackson's stats during the World Series, the runs scored, his batting average, and the impact he had on that World Series. And we'll leave you with that. Like these gentlemen said, their life work, they came true last week. He has been lifted. The ban has been lifted. Joe Jackson is no longer banned from Major League Baseball. The right thing now to close this chapter out would be for Joe Jackson, Shoeless Joe Jackson, to get into Cooperstown. We thank you for joining us. Look forward to our future episodes because Joe Jackson and Pete Rose will most certainly be discussed. We thank you for joining us. We thank our guests and have a great day. Take care.
Yeah,